Hello, MCU fans! Today's going to be my breakdown review of Daredevil Born Again, Episode 9, a truly epic season finale. So there will be spoilers, but as long as you're okay with that, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have an April contest running all month long. Be subscribed and leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. All right, so I always love to start with the timeline overview. This is everything up to episode 8, and there are a few important things we learned in this episode. It was a year and a half ago when Foggy was ready to file that dismissal for the court case. And in fact, Heather is saying specifically a year and a half ago. However, it is interesting that we also learn it was 1 year ago that Vanessa hired Bullseye to kill Foggy, even though both of those things were happening at the same time. So that's a good example of why dialogue is considered more definitive than the graphics. Sometimes the graphics round, and in this case, they rounded it to 1 year from a year and a half. But anyway, on our timeline, we can now add that Vanessa hired Bullseye in October of 2025. And we can add episode 9 along with episode 8 down at the bottom, and that's happening a year and a half later, April of 2027, and that's when Matt and Frank, of course, are attacked by the task force, and of course lots more, which we'll cover in the episode. But I do want to point out that I still think we're before the events of Brave New World, which is in mid-April of 2027, but we'll find out for sure when Brave New World gets added to the Disney Plus timeline. All right, so let's start with that Vanessa and Dex flashback, which again is a year ago, or really a year and a half ago. So we finally learn how Kingpin got free from jail. Vanessa explains the whole FBI corruption scandal with, of course, Agent Nadeem, and that was all in Daredevil Season 3. Well, that created such a mess that Kingpin was able to be acquitted and to get out of jail. And in fact, she's telling basically Dex, hey, I can do the same thing for you. So this is interesting. Notice this April date. So this is the date when he was convicted of all the murders at the end of Season 3. So what it seems like happened is he had the surgery that put all the metal in his body, and then after that surgery, he had a trial, and the result of that trial is that he was then sent to this mental institution and kept heavily medicated all this time. So I like the fact they kind of filled in the gaps for us, both with Kingpin's situation, but also with Bullseye. So Vanessa's reminding us that she hasn't seen her husband for a while, because remember, this is the point in time when he's still absent because of everything Echo did to mess him up. And we see that she's hiring Dex to kill Dumb Benny, although we learn his real name there, and also to kill Foggy. And the reason given is the case that he's involved in would shine unwanted light on some of my business practices. And we'll, of course, learn more about that in a moment. But what's real important is she's saying, basically, I need you to do it in the next few days. So this is literally happening a few days before Foggy is killed. And she says, you are the very best at this type of thing. So first, Fisk used him during Daredevil Season 3, and now Vanessa is using him in Daredevil Born Again. Poor Dex. Poor Dex. All right, so now we go to present day, and Matt is waking up in the hospital after taking that bullet for Fisk, and he immediately calls out Karen's name. Oops, right? I mean, as though Heather and Matt's relationship wasn't already in a bad place. This is not helping a bit. Then he says Heather's name. Oh, man. Not good. Not good. And then he immediately gets back to business and says, Kirsten, Vanessa Fisk ordered the hit on Foggy. I know it was them. I just don't know why. And Kirsten's saying, well, I do remember Foggy saying that he was going to file a motion to dismiss. Of course, we'll learn more about that in a minute. But Heather wants nothing to do with this, right? She says, I think it's better if I come back once you've had some rest. But I don't know. Their relationship may be completely over. It'll be interesting to see in Season 2 where things are at with them. Anyway, we now hear why Red Hook is so important to Fisk. Fisk says, Vanessa, you moved millions through Red Hook. Now that I'm mayor, we can move billions. Yes, with a B. My word, dude is going to be really rich. Then he says, I ran to save the city, but, opportunities present themselves. Yeah, he is definitely cashing in from being the mayor. Then he decides it's time to take control. There will be no body cams, no due process, no warrants. But Gallo jumps in and says, sir, that not only goes against the operating principles of the NYPD, and of course Powell's like, yeah, it does, and we're loving it. Then Gallo says it's also illegal. I mean, next you'll be condoning the use of lethal force. And how ironic that we're looking at Cole while he's saying that, because Cole, of course, used lethal force when he killed Hector. So then he sends everybody out except for Buck and tells him, imagine if our fearless lawyer from Hell's Kitchen were to succumb to his wounds. A dead hero is better than a live vigilante. All right, so then he starts testing Sheila's allegiance to basically see where she stands. He says, I've been giving some thought to what you said earlier about threats. The city just needs a little push, and then they'll come to us with open arms. So I imagine you know who on the staff is loyal and who is not. Send everybody who's not completely on board home. So this is the first test of her allegiance, and she passes with flying colors. Yes, sir, she says. Then he says, on your way out, can you send in our friend from Con Ed? And then I just think this is such a wild-looking visual. So guarding the door, basically, are 2 task force members. And, of course, over there on the right, that's the guy from Con Ed, a.k.a. the power utility guy. Anyway, now we find out how willing Sheila is to help Kingpin, because Gallo approaches her and says, he turns a bunch of rogue cops into his own personal militia, sends them out as a kill squad against vigilantes, and now he's trying to get his hands on the power switch to the city? I'm going to go to the governor. I'm going to go to the state Supreme Court. This is still the mayor's office, not the Kingpin's. And he is still subject to the law. Is he, though? Is he? Like, who's going to arrest him at this point? But anyway, now we find out what Sheila's going to do about all this. And in fact, she sends the audio that she took on her phone of Gallo over to the Kingpin. And Gallo concludes by saying, tomorrow, I'm leaving for Albany first thing. Yep, Sheila is 100% on Team Kingpin. And now Gallo is going to pay the price. He looks Fisk in the face and says, you never stopped being Kingpin. And oh man, I hope it was worth it to spout that off, because his head's about to be crushed like a grape. That was so painful to watch. And I love horror movies, but woo, that was something else. Anyway, Buck is now heading to the hospital with his gift for Matt. Aw, get well soon. So sweet. But Matt hears his footsteps and realizes who it is. And I love the music playing in the background, Killing Me Softly with his song. Perfectly appropriate song. So then Buck has to wait for a certain timing, and that timing is when the lights go out. So I thought this was fun, right? We get another Pim Van Dyne Easter egg until, boom, the lights are off, and we see the city just totally going dark. Love all the stars out, though. At least that's one perk to having no lights. And then this is just wild looking to see this much of New York without lights. Crazy. Anyway, that was the cue for Buck to go in, but he's too late because Matt has decided, I'm going to head out because I'm not fighting Buck. So yeah, he's walking painfully back to his apartment. I'm assuming the dark helps hide the fact that, he ain't got no pants on. But anyway, once he walks in the apartment, I love the smile when he realizes he's got company. So he sits down on the couch groaning. Notice the blood is already starting to form from reopening his wound. And he says, you are pretty much the last person I expected to find here. And yeah, baby, we get Frank. Nice and cleanly shaven. Boy, he really cleans up nicely, huh? But he says the power goes out and you got nothing to make a pot of coffee in this house. He really wants his coffee. That'll be coming up again in a minute. But anyway, he says, I made a promise that I was going to get you out of here alive. And it was pretty easy to guess that was Karen that had called him. But yeah, sure enough, we'll learn that in a minute. Then he says on the northwest side of the house, there's a van full of bad guys. And he says, I'll tell you right now, they come up here. I'm not playing patty cake with those fanboys. I'm chopping them up. You understand me? So I love that he calls them fanboys, because basically he knows these are the dirty cops that are using his Punisher logo. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Anyway, the choir vocalizing is them singing the Daredevil theme. As noticed, once again, the perspective of the screen shrinks because Matt is using his hearing to notice that the task force is entering the building. And sure enough, we finally learn who Hector's killer is. You notice he's wearing the Punisher logo on his outfit. And remember, we talked about in an earlier breakdown how there actually are real cops who are putting the Punisher logo on their police cars, even next to their badges. So yeah, this storyline is dealing with that real-world situation and how the Punisher is responding to it in the MCU. But we do find out it was Cole North. I kind of liked Cole, but man, I am done with him after learning he was the one that killed Hector. So then in from the skylight crashes Daredevil, because of course all his outfits were on the roof, and in from the balcony comes the Punisher, and they are ready to kick some butt. I thought this was a really cool looking shot of Punisher as he takes out these dudes' knees from the other side of the wall, and yeah, Punisher is having a good time. Look at his face. Craziness. Anyway, once they've taken down the task force, they find a familiar sight. Yep, it's those bullets with the Punisher logo on it. And Punisher says, hey, we found your guy, meaning, yeah, we found the one who killed Hector. And then it seems like Daredevil, maybe just for a second, is trying to decide what he wants to do. Like, does he want to kill this dude or not? And then Cole calls out to the others to let them know Frank Castle's here, which of course is important because we're going to later learn that they literally want Frank to join them. But anyway, Frank's wanting Daredevil to kill him, and Daredevil is saying, "You're not worth it. You're not worth it." Trying to convince himself, basically. But in a way, I don't know that they need to finish Cole off because suddenly a grenade is thrown in the room. Now, let me know your thoughts. Obviously, Daredevil and Punisher escape. They jump out the window, and then we see, the whole place goes up. I mean, if Cole is in there right now, he's dead. The question is, did he rip his hand off the wall, to get it off that knife, and did he get out in time? I'm kind of curious your thoughts. My guess is they're not done with him yet because he seems like such an important character. And then we see that their Uber driver arrives, and it is indeed Karen. So that means Karen was the one that called Frank to ask him to help Matt. And I love the fact that Matt calls shotgun. I mean, even Frank has to chuckle at that one. That was pretty funny. So they head back to Frank's little hideout, and he finally gets that cup of coffee. Nothing in the world a good cup of coffee can't fix, he says. And then he turns to Karen and says, "You want a cup?" Oh, we all know what he's asking, right? We all know. In fact, Matt's sitting there going, "Guys, I'm still in the room, and I know what it means too, okay?" If you watch the Netflix shows, you know exactly what they're talking about. Anyway, they ask Frank to join them, and he says, "I got other stuff to do." And Karen says, "I don't believe you don't care." But he has a good point. He says, "You asked me for a favor, and I did it." So she's like, "Well, thank you." And then he just looks away and says, "Stay safe." Oh man, there is definitely some romantic tension between Frank and Karen. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Anyway, then we see that even the legislative branch is under Fisk's control because Daniel explains to the city council that the Kingpin is very interested in their accomplishments. Oh, such as the $540,000 stashed in a Swiss bank account. So yeah, Daniel's explaining the mayor will be addressing the city in a couple of hours, and he hopes that Safer Streets has your full support. That is not a good sign when the Kingpin basically has control of the police, the council, even the courts. He's got everything wrapped up. All right, so then we see that the task force is using the blackout to create their own story. So this one member is saying, "Hey, we just shot a kid." But his superior is saying, "Oh, no, it's a masked vigilante," and shoves a mask on his head. So basically they're using the situation to justify their own existence. Crazy. And then we see that Matt might be a little jealous because he says, "Back at Frank's place, I heard your heartbeats." And Heather's like, "Oh, crap. I hate that he can do that. I hate that." But anyway, she then asks a good question. "Well, did you hear mine when I saw you?" There is a definite little romantic triangle going on here. I hope they pursue that in season 2. Anyway, what they're searching for is Foggy's motion to dismiss that he never filed, but along the way, they find some nice little callbacks to season 1, Avocados at Law, which is a callback to when Foggy wasn't able to pronounce a Spanish word for lawyers. He thought it was avocados. So I just love how they're tying everything in, even to the flashbacks in season 1. Then finally, Karen finds Foggy's unfiled case dismissal, which remember is from a year and a half ago, and in fact learns that the port of Red Hook is something called a free port. So basically, it is exempt from the jurisdiction of the city and the country, for that matter. And in fact, we had hints about how important this was way back in episode 1, because remember Vanessa said, Red Hook is exempt from any taxes, tolls, or other payments. So she was even having the 5 families treat it as though it was something special. What we didn't realize is it's exempt from everything. Basically, even across the country. That is insane. That means that Vanessa could launder money legally. And in fact, as Matt explains, no. This is about the Fisks building their own city-state. He would basically be untouchable. Goodness. Anyway, while that's going on, Frank decides to launch his own little war. So he's listening to the communications and hears that everyone is falling back to the Rendezvous 1 point at Red Hook. Well, he knows where that is, so he heads off with, I don't know, did he have a plan? I really couldn't tell if he had one. He's just really lucky that they decided to use non-lethals only. So maybe his assumption was, they're fanboys, he knows that, so maybe he assumed they wouldn't kill him. And in fact, even though he killed some of them, they still tie him up and then tell him, "Hey, it's an honor to meet you, Castle. And listen, everything you do, you can do that with us, and you don't got to run anymore." You do have to wonder if for the briefest of minutes he was like, yeah, that would be kind of nice. But I'm betting when Powell said it would be an honor to serve with you, Frank, that was when it was over, right? Because Frank takes service, particularly military service, very seriously. So yeah, he is done with them. So Frank says, you admire me, huh? And Powell's like, yeah. He's like, you're a bunch of clowns. You know that? I bet that was really satisfying to say. And he's like, you think you know my loss? Basically challenging them, saying, you have no idea what drives me. No idea why I do what I do. So yeah, basically his answer is no. But while he's being held captive, Matt and Karen arrive. And I don't even know if Matt knows Frank is in there. I'm betting he doesn't. But they notice the place is crawling with task force members. Nonetheless, Matt says, all right, I'm going in. Stay here. Stay out of sight. And Karen's like, you go in there, you will die. Very wise words, Karen. He would not last against all of them, especially as injured as he is. Can you believe he's even walking around, let alone he was ready to go in there and fight? So he sighs and says, I'm going to take this city back, Karen. So she's like, okay, where do we start? And he says, we need an army. So my first thought was, you have an army. Get all these folks back again, please, like yesterday. Oh my goodness. Hopefully season 2 will have at least Jessica Jones, but I would love all of them back again. So let me know who you think should be in his army, but at minimum, I want the Defenders. And if you could give me Spider-Man, oh, I'd be a happy, happy man. Anyway, the lights are back on, which means the power is back on to these creepy things. I mean, normally it'd be fine. I am glad the police are keeping an eye on everything. But with Fisk being in charge of the police, ooh boy, I don't know. So then we see that Heather has made a very bad decision. She's offered to be the administration's commissioner of mental health. And she's like, it would be my honor, Mayor Fisk. Let me tell you what, I'm done with her. I am so done with her. Let me know your thoughts, but I can't stand her anymore. So good, you go join Fisk. Have fun with that. So now Kingpin is in control of the city and lets everyone know that. He says, I'm enacting my Safer Streets initiative, effective immediately. All vigilante activity is illegal, and it will be dealt with accordingly. The craziest thing is, though, he said curfew is at 8 p.m. Every bar owner and nightclub owner are like, hey, wait a minute. No. 8 p.m., what are you doing? You're killing us. Nonetheless, he says the city is under martial law. And then, never forget, I love New York, although his face does not look convincing. Not convincing at all. All right, so then we see Matt getting a pep talk from Heather. Matt says, I thought God had taken away my sight, but then he'd given me a special destiny, like a mask and a purpose that could save my life. My mistake was thinking I was immune to the darkness. That's really deep because he's understanding the darkness can overtake him, and in fact it did when he threw Poindexter off that rooftop. But then Heather says, Foggy believed in you, both the wrath and the mercy, the dark and the light. He knew all of it, all of it. He knew you, and I do too. Man, that's exactly what Matt needed to hear. So he puts on his mask and heads out into the main area of Josie's bar and gives a pep talk of his own. In fact, as he's doing so, we learn many of the members of his army. So he says, the system isn't working. I love that Josie is part of his army, by the way. That's awesome. And it's rotten, corrupt. But this is our city. So I hope this means BB is going to be part of his team because she obviously didn't get the information from Gallo before he was killed. And he says, and we can take it back together. And then we see a few more members of his potential army. Angela, who will hopefully become the White Tiger next season. We see Kirsten is finally taking this whole Red Hook situation seriously. And I gotta wonder if Mr. OCD himself, fixing that picture frame, if Dex may actually be joining up with Daredevil. Wouldn't that be wild? I mean, I just want Bullseye back no matter what, right? I don't care how we get him. I just want him back. But wouldn't that be crazy if he joined up with Daredevil? Anyway, he says, because we are the city without fear. That's awesome, right? Man without fear. Now we have the city without fear. And they're all hanging out in Josie's messed up looking bar. So very, very cool. That's their new headquarters, I assume. So I love it. Love it. Meanwhile, we see that Kingpin has several more prisoners locked up in cages down in his little torture dungeon. We see Jack. Oh, that's poor Jack. That makes me so mad. Jack, you got to get out of there and kick some butt, man. I don't know if the lady next to him is supposed to be somebody we know. I don't think so, but I do think this guy is somebody important. I think that is Arthur Sledge, because in the credits, they actually list both Artemis and Arthur, although I didn't see her. If you saw Artemis in here, let me know. But I think this is Arthur. And remember, Artemis is the one that told off the Kingpin a couple episodes ago, letting him know that the people in this room decide who gets to eat. But it turns out she's the one that gets hosed by the Kingpin because Arthur, her husband, is missing. Jack asks, "Where's your better half, Arthur?" And she's like, I don't know. Do you? Well, now we know. He's stuck in a cage. And then he's like, "Well, excuse me, Artemis, is everything okay?" Well, I'm really curious. Is Artemis there too or not? But definitely Arthur is there. And then here's an interesting little fun fact. So we learned Bastian's last name. It's Cooper, right? Bastian Cooper. However, if you look closely at this notepad that Heather was taking the notes on about him, and then, of course, he grabs it to draw the mask, if we flip this name around, it's Bastian Sledge. Yes, originally it seems that Bastian was going to be the son of Artemis and Arthur. Because remember, his parents were rich. We knew that much. But for some reason, they switched away from this and obviously, didn't try to CGI out this little last name there. But it doesn't say Cooper. There ain't no way that's the word Cooper. That is Sledge. So, wild. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think that would have been cool if Artemis and Arthur were actually his parents? Anyway, we also see that Frank has been kept in a cage of his own. Not for long, though. Not for long. Meanwhile, we have Kingpin and Vanessa toasting away in their little torture dungeon, and right behind them is the rabbit in a snowstorm painting with that blood splotch on it. Very, very cool. All right, so then we move to the mid-credit scene. And what was this guy thinking? How can you possibly shake Frank's hand? Because, well, that's the last handshake this guy's going to be given for a long time. As his bones are cracking and he's pulled into the cage. I mean, granted, he's probably another fanboy. He thought, I get to shake his hand. This is awesome. Nope. Punisher's getting away. And in fact, this will probably lead to that special presentation we've been told we're going to get. Brad Winderbaum said it's coming. So yeah, Punisher is going to be kicking some butt. So we're going to get to see him and how his story continues on, probably next year around the same time that season 2 comes out. In fact, speaking of season 2, they even give us the little James Bond ending. Daredevil will return in season 2. So that's going to be awesome. And will Foggy return? You might remember several breakdowns ago, I mentioned this interview where Brandon Davis said, so when you say there's no story without Karen and Foggy, is that really where we're going now? And Brad Winderbaum himself said, without going into spoiler territory, I will say that both Deborah and Eldon are coming back for season 2. So now you know why I kept thinking that, Foggy's going to be alive, but it wasn't revealed. So I'm thinking more and more it's going to be flashbacks. But hey, if there's some way Foggy made it through this, I would love it. So let me know your thoughts on what the chances are that Foggy's still alive. But I'm moving my chances down to around 10%. Anyway, what a great season. I really, really enjoyed it. And it was rocky. It was rocky because they, redid things midstream, but I still felt overall that it was enjoyable. And I cannot wait now for season 2. So let me know. What did you think? Do you think it was a solid season? And how excited are you for season 2? So don't forget about that contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the Daredevil Born Again spoiler section, always hopping right after an episode drops. Love this meme about, hey, if this is my army, I'm going to die. Anyway, 2,100 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.